Well, a very warm welcome back to another little video, and I thought it was a long while since I had done anything in my little series of looking at cheaper second-hand GRP boats that are still about out there. I've already done a couple on the Freeman range, of some of the smaller Freeman range, which I know well, and I've also done one on Norman cruisers, which they're again a boat manufacturer that I knew very well, having had them. Thought I'd do another one today. This has been a bit different, because a little bit to start with is more on the history of this company, because I have a family member that worked there for many years, right from its conception. And I don't really want to go into that in this video. I would perhaps like to do something on that at a later date. And also, you might say, well, hang about, this company built, you know, some mega motor yachts later on in its life, which is true, it did. But it had a very humble beginnings, and I think there's still some smaller boats of this mark out there that are worth looking at, and I think it's got quite a interesting history. The company I'm going to have a look at this time is Fairline Boats of Oundle, and we have to go back to 1962-63 when a guy called Jack Newington, now he was a businessman from Peterborough, and I think in the early 60s or even into the late 50s he had got very much into boating on the river Nen in and around Peterborough, and he had in those days, obviously you couldn't go and buy an off the peg cruiser, you know, most of the boats were still wood, and he'd purchased a second-hand lifeboat that had been converted into a cruiser, and got really interested to messing about with boats and on the river. And the thing that he found was that there was no facilities, you know, there was no slipways, there was no chandleries, there was no way you could buy fuel, there wasn't even many places you could moor up, unless you were fortunate to know somebody, you know, with a garden or a bit of land or a field that permitted you to moor your boat there. So it was very sketchy in those days. We often forget, you know, that sort of in the 1950s and even on into the early 60s, boating as a enjoyment hobby, as you were, a leisure pursuit, I think is what they'd call it now, was in its infancy. And so anyway, Jack Newington, he was a bit of an entrepreneur, and as I say, he was a businessman. I think he had his a company that dealt in frozen foods. I believe it was even frozen chickens, but I'm not 100% sure about that one. But it was certainly frozen foods, and he'd been very successful at this. And he decided, as he couldn't, you know, find the facilities, he would go and make his own. And in 1962-63, he bought a couple or three, or I think there was probably more than that, probably 2, 3 or even 4 disused gravel pits along the Barmel Road in Oundle, which, as I say, is only 13 miles from Peterborough, so you know, not far from where he was at that time with his business. And it's interesting to look back even further in history. Those gravel pits along the where now the Oundle Marina is, and was the original home and the start-up place of Fairline boats. Well, where those gravel pits, how those gravel pits came to be dug out was they were dug out in the early part of the war in 1940s. Obviously there was a huge need to construct airfields, and there was many airfields around that, you know, around Oundle and that surrounding part of the countryside, you know. And so obviously there was a huge need for aggregate and sand to produce concrete. Most of the you know, particularly the heavy bomber bases had concrete runways then, and so that these gravel pits on the Barmel Road were dug out for that reason. Bringing us back to 1963, Jack Newington, as I say, decided to create the Oundle Marina, and he put a narrow cutway through to the river, and so it was connected to the river then, and obviously then he built a chandlery shop, a showroom, you know, he made roads, he had some offices there, and he had some small workshops where work could, you know, be done on boats, and there was a slipway, and etc, etc, and it became the Oundle Marina. Now, moving the story on a few years to 1966, a local author by the name of DJ Watkins Pitchford, better known as, he wrote under the name of BB, two capital B's, BB, and he wrote some a classic child's book, Little Grey Men, and he wrote many travel books around this country. He was very much he loved the countryside, and he wrote about what he saw in the countryside and all that kind of thing. And why I brought him into the whole equation of this was that it's interesting because in 1966 he hired one of Jack Newington's Freeman Mark I's. By this time Jack Newington had got a small hire fleet of boats as well operating out of Oundle Marina. And I think by that time he had 3 or 4 Freeman Mark I boats. And this author wrote, and I'll to my best of my abilities, I'll read this out to you, because this is the state of play at 1966. It says, the marina is of recent construction. Mr. Newington bought the property, disused sand and gravel pits adjoining the river, in 1963. During the summer of that year, he connected the marina to the main river by a narrow cut and installed slipways, roads, car park, office, and later a fine showroom. He started operations with a pair of 4 5-berth cruisers for hire. Petrol and water can be obtained at the marina, and there are some delightful moorings in the marina basins itself. He fits boats out as well as hiring them, and is now venturing into the fiberglass field to actually build fiberglass boats. And that was, as I say, that was written in May 1966, and that was the start of Fairline Boats. I think what Jack Newington did, and he bought a 19-foot boat mould off an ailing boat company that was just about to go out of business, and that became the first Fairline, which was the Fairline 19, which, as I say, was built by hand in a workshop not much bigger than the size of a double garage, say, by about 4 or 5 blokes. None who were, you know, professional boat builders at that time, but then fiberglass was a new medium still, really, and everybody was experimenting with it. By 1966 it was still very much new ground, this fiberglass boat building sort of technology of that period. But by all accounts the Fairline 19 proved a very popular little boat. The vast majority of those early ones were, you know, you had a transom and you fitted an outboard motor on the back of them, but they made a super little day boat, a weekend boat. You know, you had a berth in there, you had a little toilet compartment and an aft cockpit that you could sit out in. And I will, as always on my videos, I'll put some pictures, you know, of these boats as we go along, kind of thing. So, as I say, that was in 1966, and the Fairline 19, you know, was born, and they went into production, and obviously found a market for that boat. I think Jack Newington then did a very clever thing. He, in that sort of autumn, or even late summer autumn of 1966, obviously they'd built several of these Fairline 19s by that point in time. He tied up with Sir Donald Campbell, who was trying to break the water speed record on Coniston up in the Lake District, and Jack Newington said, you know, well, you can have some of our Fairline 19s and use them, you know, as timing boats, moderation boats, boats to tow things about on the lake. They were used in all manner of things, I think, when Fairline, I don't know about the money side of it. I don't think any money was exchanged, because I'll come on to that later. I think it was Fairline saw it as a good advertising ploy, because there again, there'll be a picture of one of these Fairline 19s on Coniston water. They had emblazoned down the side of them Fairline 19, and obviously they knew, Jack Newington knew, this event was going to be covered by the, you know, even in those days, even they still had cinema newsreels, they had television, you know, and this was going to be filmed, you know, at big time when Donald Campbell tried to break this record. Sadly, of course, in early January 1967, he'd done one run, Donald Campbell, and had actually broken the record, I think, if my memory serves me right. But on his return run, his boat, Bluebird, flipped over, and he sadly was killed in Coniston. That brings me on to the deal. The deal was that the London Boat Show was, you know, going to start the next week, and had Donald Campbell broke the record and, you know, survived and cracked it, he was going to appear on the little Fairline boat stand at the London Earls Court Boat Show of 1967, which had been quite a, you know, a draw, wouldn't it? You know, to have somebody like that who had just broken the water speed record come onto your, you know, they're a very small company in those. They'd only got, you know, the Fairline 19 basically, but to have somebody of that stature come and, you know, onto your stand at the boat show would be quite amazing. And sadly, it never came to fruition, because poor Donald Campbell died in trying that second run across Coniston. So the boats were just brought back to Oundle, and I assume, you know, disposed of, were sold thereafter. But that didn't stop Fairline. You know, I think the business started to flourish, and, you know, these became a very popular boat, not only on the rivers, but they were, you know, quite a capable little coastal boat as a day boat again, you know, or a fishing boat if you wanted to go, you know, go rod fishing out, you know, for a day. They were quite a good little boat, the 19 foots, and there were many variations of it then. Even if we come up to, I've got some prices here, and we're up to 1972 in these are the boat show prices. And if we have a look, by that time they had got the Fairline Deluxe, which was classed as a cruiser, and GRP, and that was the 19-foot one, but it was called the Fairline Deluxe then. And by that time we had the Fairline Family, which was 20-foot 3. The Fairline Deluxe, there again, this is without an outboard motor, it's just for the boat itself, was £1,075, and the Fairline Family at 20 foot was £1,245, and as I say, you would have to buy an outboard motor on that as well. I think some of those models were fitted with inboards, some of them had water motor petrels, some of them even had very early Volvo engines, inboards, and so as I say, you know, by that early 70s point, it was quite a thriving little business, and I think the staff round about that time in 71 had risen to 14. There was 14 down there working on the Fairline side of things at the Oundle Marina. Also interestingly, around that time, Jack Newington sort of persuaded his son, Sam, who had been had a very successful career. He'd been a fighter pilot in the RAF, flying Hawker Hunters and jet aircraft of that period. and served in Germany, and had also then gone into the family frozen food business. But I think Jack could see that, you know, the boat side of things could really sort of take off with sort of Sam's business sense, and so Jack got Sam into the boat side of the business in around about 70, 71, and you know, that is when I think Fairline really started to take off. It wasn't long then that you know, such models as the I think they built a 20-foot called a Fairline Vixen. The Fairline Fury came along, which was about a 26-foot boat, I think. There again, I'll put some pictures of these, and then as I say, by 1974, I was amazed, because at that time I was quite privileged. I occasionally got to go and have a look around the Oundle factory, because there was only the small, still relatively small Oundle factory site at that time, and I got to go and have a look round, and I was astounded in 1974, around about that period, when they were building the Fairline Phantom, which was you know, a 34-foot boat, or 30 foot, I can't remember. I'll look at that. You know, my memory slips, but it seemed massive, you know, to build such a thing in fiberglass in less than, if you think they started building boats in 1966. So that was only 8 years, and they were now building something like the Phantom, which was quite incredible. So I think Sam really drove the company on, and you know, where there was, you know, only about 14 employees when he took over. So as I say, there was only, you know, relatively sort of 14 employees in that 1970 when Sam came into the boating side of the business, and you know, by 1979, say, that figure had gone up tenfold, and Fairline was quite a good, or big, I should say, local employer around that area. And obviously the boats had started, you know, to get bigger and bigger. The Fairline 19 and those offshoots of it, I think there was around 700 of those produced. And another very popular model that was started in the 1970s was the Fairline Holiday, which had various marks, which was a 23 cruiser. Still loads of those about, and there again I think they built between sort of 600 and 700 of those over the years, and that's quite a, you know, that when you think, that's quite a large number of boats, you know, as I say. And by the end of the we reached the end of the 70s, or 1977, I mean, they'd even moved on to building the Fairline 40, a 40-foot, you know, fiberglass boat, which there again I thought was astounding. But obviously, you know, I'll end the story in the early 80s, because, you know, I mean, Fairline went on, they really took over that Mediterranean market, and they had huge export orders. They built some fantastic boats, you know, for the next good few years throughout the 80s and on into the 90s. They really domineered what you'd probably call the motor yacht business, you know, really high class, big boats. But as I say, if you're looking for something small still, you know, there are still some of these Fairline 19s out there, you know, great little starter boats, they are, and they've certainly stood the test of time, much as the Freemans. You know, these boats are now 50, 55 years old, some of them, but they're still out there, and people still cherish them. You know, I've looked online and found, you know, quite a few still out there, quite a few for sale. And as I've said, like the Fairline Vixen, that was another popular model in the 70s, the Fairline Holiday, we've said. If you've got a bit more money to spend, and I think that started in the mid-70s, the Fairline Mirage, which was a lovely boat, a 28-foot boat. You could either have, they eventually did an aft cockpit version or an aft cabin version. The aft cockpit version was the most popular. It has got a hard top, but you could have a version with a soft top and folding windscreen if you're on a river, you know, that had got low bridges, etc. And the Mirage was a very nice boat, and there again they still hold their price up, and you know, we're still sort of 16, 17, 18, 19,000 pounds plus probably. You might find it a cheap one if it needs work doing, but a really super boat. To quickly sum up, and my apologies, I sat here last evening in my little office doing that video, and I didn't realise how long I'd been talking, and I didn't switch the lights on, so some of the video got very dark. I can ramble when it comes to boats, so I'm going to quickly and briefly bring this video to a close. I'm having to redo this little bit section this morning. As I was saying, Fairline boats are certainly worth a look. Some of their older, cheaper models, like we've said, even the 19 and the Deluxe 20, if you can find them, they're still out there. I've seen quite a few for sale. The Holiday, the Vixen, you know, if you've got a bit more money, well, you open up to various more models kind of thing. It depends how much you want to spend on a GRP boat. Obviously, most of them, apart from those very early Fairlines, which are 7-foot beam, most of the later Fairlines are wide beam boats, you know, well over 7-foot beam, so obviously they wouldn't go on narrow canals. They are just purely river and coastal boats. When, you know, when they get into the mid to late 70s, those boats are too wide. But a good boat, very well. I've never owned a Fairline, strangely enough, but I know many people that have, and as I've said, I have a family connection with the firm by, you know, knowing somebody that worked there for many, many years. And you know, one of their, on all their advertising blurb, it used to say, you know, Fairlines were handcrafted, as all boats are. You know, they're laid up by hand into a mould, and then the fitting out is all, you know, very much, you know, it's got to be virtually hand built, every boat. I always liked Fairline's later interiors. They seemed very light, airy. The curtains and the upholstery matched all really well, and you could see a lot of thought and design had been put into the boats, even in those, you know, mid-70s on into the early 80s boats. So as I say, I think they're, you know, a boat certainly worth looking at, and you know, I rate them. As I say, I think they're a good, well-made boat with good quality control. They use good materials. They've certainly stood the test of time. They're like all boats. They do wear, and you have to, you know, as I said before, you have to look over them carefully. Or if you're buying an old boat, have a survey done for the price of, for the peace of mind, if you're that way inclined. Particularly if you're spending, you know, quite a lot of money on a boat, that is. But certainly worth a look, the Fairline range, and particularly those early ones that we've looked at. As I say, thank you for watching as always. Please like, subscribe, comment. We'd love to hear your comments as always, and I'll try and respond to them as always, as I try. And hopefully in the next few weeks we'll be able to get out in this country, in the UK, doing some more, you know, proactive boating videos when we can, you know, safely get out and about again. But thanks ever so much to everybody that watches the videos, and with that I'll say goodbye for this time, and thank you for watching again, and see you very soon for sure. Yeah, bye for now.